Welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus. I'm Anthony Hennen, the Pennsylvania reporter for the Center Square. Joining me today is the Center Square's Pennsylvania editor, Christen Smith. We're going to dive right into it. Pennsylvania has been dealing with some constitutional amendments around child sexual abuse survivors and some statute of limitations issues. What can you tell us? What's happening with this now?
So this week, the House is finally back in session after a 5-week hiatus. The timing of it is pretty interesting considering there was a one-seat minority for the Democratic Party up until February 7th. Now they have cemented their control and they are back and they are controlling the calendar too, which is key here. Number one priority for House Speaker Rozzi has been to pass a constitutional amendment that would allow the adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse to sue their abusers in court. This has been a long time coming in the legislature, and they just approved that constitutional amendment in committee on Tuesday. They're back today to vote the full amendment expectedly. What's also important to note here is that they have also passed a statutory bill. The difference being that a statutory bill would serve basically as a law. Once it passed and got signed by the governor, it'd become immediately effective. There's been a lot of pushback from Senate Republicans mostly that doing something like this rather than the constitutional amendment path is really risky legally and may end up failing. So that is where we're at as of this moment, as of Thursday, February 23rd on this, but it's a developing story.
When we're talking about the timeline here, I mean, what's this looking at? Does this seem like this is going to be something that keeps getting dragged out, or is this something that can finally, after months and years, essentially, of dealing with this, is there light at the end of the tunnel here, or is it just still up in the air?
Unfortunately, I think that it's still up in the air. I mean, if all the stars aligned and the House got this out of their chamber this week and punted it over to the Senate, we would still have this big hurdle of having to get the Senate to agree to pass at least the constitutional amendment. We know they're not going to support the statutory bill. The issue here is that the Senate has already expressed that they don't think that this effort, this constitutional amendment, is the way to go. To rewind a few weeks, back on January 11th, the Senate approved Senate Bill 1, which was another constitutional amendment that dealt with the same exact issue. That Senate bill, however, included two other constitutional amendments, one for voter ID and another for regulatory reform. This is something of a poison pill for Democrats. They don't support voter ID and they don't support this regulatory reform. And so because of this, they've been in an impasse for 5 to 6 weeks. So the amendment that's being sent back to the Senate only does the statute of limitations reform. Everybody is in agreement that this is something they want to put on the ballot, which at this point wouldn't happen until November at the earliest. But these little, partisan disagreements may very well stall the effort again. There's timelines that the legislature has to hit in order to get these things on the ballot. They already missed the deadline for the May primary, so now they're aiming for the November general. We'll see if they make it. As of right now, the Senate doesn't want to seem to play ball. And whether or not that they can come to some kind of agreement in the next few weeks, we'll see.
Oh, lucky us for getting to watch this drama and perhaps at some point, in some way, having a resolution here.
The worst part is we've been here multiple times before. This issue first came out of back in 2018 when then Attorney General Josh Shapiro released a grand jury investigation into widespread sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. It is something that involved over 1,000 children and 300 priests. And since then, the legislature has kind of gone back and forth about how we're going to implement this policy. Again, at the heart of it was this fight over constitutional amendment versus statutory bill. They kind of all coalesced around constitutional amendment. What's important to remember here is that the constitutional amendment process is not quick. Best case scenario is it takes 2 years because you have to pass it in 2 consecutive legislative sessions. Pennsylvania legislative sessions are 2 years long. And so what happened the first time around that we got this passed was that on top of getting it through 2 legislative sessions, then the Department of State has to go through a bunch of regulatory hoops, for better word, to get this advertised properly, to get it, formatted correctly so that it can be on the ballot and, have all those legals, T's crossed, I's dotted, the whole thing. Well, just days before the Senate was to vote the constitutional amendment for the second time and ensure that it could go to the ballot if the State Department hit all of its regulatory requirements, the State Department came out and said, oops, we missed a big one the last year. They were supposed to advertise the fact that this proposed constitutional amendment had passed once, and they didn't do that. And they missed this error for months until they realized when the second round of approval was coming that they didn't do this advertising. That setback was enormously heartbreaking for everybody involved. And it was at that point that, again, the Senate was pushed to do the statutory bill. They wouldn't because, again, legal quagmire, they're not willing to get into it. So at that point, the best case scenario was that we would have an amendment on the ballot in May 2023. Well, it is February 2023. And because of partisan gridlock and a lot of bickering about things like rules, which most people don't have much of a concept of, there is no chance for that amendment to end up on the ballot in May, as we previously discussed. So we're coming down to the wire again. And now they'll have an entire 18 months, well, longer than that, until the end of 2024 to get this across the finish line again so that it can get on some ballot in the future. The hope is that they can get their act together before November, but it could be, with the way this legislature is, it could be till the end of 24 or even beyond it. It's really a shame for the victims who have been waiting for so very long and have come so very close over and over and over just to keep hitting these walls that, quite honestly, the legislature could break down if they really wanted to.
Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com. For Christen Smith, this is Anthony Hennen. Please subscribe, and thanks for listening.